now. Okay, I am recording now. We have 19, 20 students present right now. Okay, before I start today, I want to make some announcements. Well, really not announcements, just reminders. So let me share my screen really quick. So this is where am I? I'm gonna share this screen. Let me admit this person. Okay. So just to give you an idea of where we are right now, I don't know if you can see this box, green box highlighting today, which is April the 5th, the live session on Zoom. Today, we're going to start the income distribution and poverty section of this class. But again, this is just to give you a quick reminder of everything we have covered so far. So this is where we are. The second midterm is a month from today, exactly a month. Then your final is 1 week after. And the other reason I wanted to do this, I don't know why it turned blue. I think I highlighted the whole page. But the other thing I want to do, and this is the reminding part, is that your research paper for this class is due on Monday, May 3rd. So you have more than 4 weeks to complete this assignment. I have been communicating with some of you regarding drafts and ideas. So I know some of you are working on it, but more than half of you, I have no idea. So you better start working on this because this is not the kind of paper that you can finish in a couple of nights. So you want to spend some time doing some research, some reasoning, and making sure it's well written. So 5 o'clock is the deadline. Please attach this to your email to me and send it in Word format so I can actually type back some comments with the different colors or something so that you can see my reasoning behind whatever grade you get. So anyway, any comments or any questions about the material, about the paper, about dates, about anything? Okay, so everything seems to be clear so far. This is not a very complicated class with lots of homework and different things to keep track. So I was not expecting any questions, so that's a good sign. Sandeep, you're on the screen now. Is it because you have a question?
No, I don't have a question.
All right. It's good to see you, man. It's good to see you.
Same here.
All right. So, okay. Any other comments or questions before we start? Hearing none. All right. Let me close this, and then I'm going to go to my presentation now. Okay. So, like I said, today we are going to start a brand new section on income distribution and poverty. So I am going to split this discussion in two. One, the first section is going to be about poverty, and the second section is going to be about income inequality, income distribution. Many people confuse poverty with inequality, and that's not good. It is obviously true that income distribution or income inequality and poverty are closely related, but they are not the same thing. So in this section, I'm going to try to explain what each one of these are, what the differences are. And of course, I'm going to put all this in the context of Latin America. And the idea of doing this is to, continue with our conversation as to, why this is the case happening now in Latin America, but also how what is happening now is shaping up many of the phenomena that we are observing today, including migration, including crime, including, I'm talking about not just the underground economy in Latin America, I'm talking about narco trafficking, kidnapping, organ trafficking, all of these different criminal activities taking place in Latin America that, definitely have a, at least partially, an economic origin, and this is part of it. Anyway, so Quick summary, we have seen, this is part of the introduction so that, after the spring break, you have a good idea of what's going on. Wait a second, I'm not sure if I am recording this. Does it show that I am recording this session? Anybody can tell me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you are.
Okay, all right. I'm sharing my screen and it's not showing up there. Never mind then. Okay, so we have seen that after the debt crisis in Latin America, the multilateral agencies like the IMF, the World Bank implemented the so-called Washington Consensus, which basically was a set of policies such as privatization, liberalization, deregulation, and you can read that on the screen. They were described and they were framed as very painful measures, but necessary conditions for economic cleansing. If Latin America wanted to really be back on track to economic growth, they have to take this painful medicine, right? And of course, the basic argument was the trickle-down economics. So the idea was, okay, guys, you were emphasizing poverty alleviation, income inequality alleviation, and that's good, but you were taking the wrong approach. You cannot give people handouts. You cannot print money and create all these social programs left and right. I'm talking about using the arguments of the neoliberal agenda. They said, no. The best way to do it is you need to emphasize supply side economics, in essence. Remember, Reaganomics, Margaret Thatcher in England, the idea that instead to tackle poverty and inequality, what we need to be doing is supporting the private sector so that we create jobs, and that instead of giving handouts to the population through subsidies and food stamps or the equivalent of food stamps in Latin America, which very few countries have actually, instead of doing that, we should be giving them jobs, right? So in principle, this seems like a no-brainer, right? Oh, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, what else can we do? I mean, this is the solution. Well, this is the part I'm trying to explain in this section, that is not that easy in the context of Latin America, right? So through the Washington Consensus policies, these institutions basically gave priority to efficiency over equity. The new trade regime, which basically was geared toward putting international trade at the center of the economic strategy, as you remember, was first implemented in Chile, 1973, after the military coup, Augusto Pinochet, the Chicago Boys, then in Mexico after the debt crisis, and then after all these this domino effect throughout Latin America, eventually was adopted in Brazil, Colombia, and many other countries. We don't have time to discuss the literature, but in general, I can give you, point you to papers that say, oh, it was a success. And I can give you another set of papers. I'm talking about scientific journals. That's what I'm talking about, economic literature. Another set of papers saying, oh, it was a complete failure. So, to be fair, the evidence is mixed. Because I can, pick a few papers and claim, showing you only these papers, that the strategy was a success. Or I can do the opposite. I can only pick those papers that show it was a failure, and without showing you the others, you would see, oh, okay, it was a failure. But no, the reality is that there is evidence that is mixed. What is not so clear is what happened in terms of income distribution and inequality. I think it's mostly widely accepted that economic growth took place, that exports increased significantly, that employment actually grew. But remember, those are necessary but not sufficient conditions for economic development. And that's, again, this is part of the introduction. That's where I'm going. So let me give you a very important element that can explain some of what's going on here. As you know, all throughout the last, I don't know, 20 plus years, we have been through this technification process, automation process. And actually, this is longer. I mean, this began in the Industrial Revolution. But I'm talking about an acceleration of this process in recent times, whereby an investment in capital, and by this I mean buying equipment, robots, machinery that can substitute labor. This is labor-saving technology. You can literally lay off 20 workers that have low skills. You know, you can think of this as high school level or below that. And all you need is that equipment plus an engineer and a technician, or 2 engineers or whatever. So you are going to lay off 20 workers, unskilled workers, and you only need 2 skilled workers. You know, that's a basic idea. Now, think about what this does. If this company is doing this and many other companies are doing pursuing similar endeavors, in the aggregate, this is what is going to happen. You're going to have what you can call a glut, a large number of unskilled workers being displaced by technology. So the demand for low-skilled workers is going down, and the demand for high-skilled workers is going up. So if you have a high school degree or lower than that, bad luck. Very few job opportunities for you in the formal sector. If you go to college and you become an engineer, an accountant, an economist, a marketing person, an attorney, great, because now the information-driven world that characterizes, the last few years is putting a premium on skill. So your skill set is going to be in higher demand than those without skills. Now, over time, look what happens. Over time, the people with no skills are going to start getting behind, and there is going to be a gap widening and widening. I don't know if I can make this idea clear. Widening over time, increasing wage disparities. So the point I'm trying to make here, guys, is that this argument that all we need to do, what we need to do instead of giving people handouts, becoming this paternalistic state and this paternalistic government giving stuff away, we should be creating jobs, is not as easy in the context of Latin America, where you have 2/3 or more of the population with no skills, because they have very poor access to education, not only education, but health, which is the second component of human capital, right? But also because, the technology is not helping. We are displacing or misplacing a large number of these workers in favor of those very privileged ones that have access to education, right? So keep that in mind, because this is going to come back. So let me let Norma in. Okay. So this is the end of the introduction. And the reason this is important is because, think about this. I'm reading this box with, what color is this? Red, purple, brownish color. Poverty constrains human beings from investing in education and health. So when you are poor, and this is the what some economists refer to as the poverty cycle. When you are poor, you don't have the ability to get more educated or to get healthier, because you don't have money to pay for the doctor, or the opportunity cost of going to school is just way too high. I can give you examples of, well, I don't have, fortunately, any relatives, but I have friends whose families, the children don't go to school because it's too costly, not because they have to pay. No, I'm talking about the opportunity cost. if the children go to school, that means that they cannot work on the street, you know, washing windshields or selling gum or you know, shoe shining or whatever. And that is a huge loss for the household income. And that's the cost I'm talking about. So it's not that it's costly to go to school, it's the opportunity cost of attending school. So this perpetuates poverty, because when all these children don't go to school and they don't have access to, you know, glasses to read or dental work, you know, to eat better, or they have parasitic diseases or whatever, obviously the productivity level and the skill set that they are able to develop is very limited. And that's the whole idea of the poverty cycle. In terms of inequality, you know, speaking about this wage dispersion over time, inequality skews opportunities towards the rich, not the others, you know, the others that desperately need it, right? We're going to talk about inequality more extensively later. But think about this too. Poverty and inequality also constitute important sources of social breakdown. You know, many people in Latin America, and you can go there now, and they are going to tell you very touching stories of working 60, 70 hours a week, of, in addition to that, taking care of their children, the elderly, they are ill, they are missing one leg. I mean, you know, terrible stories. And in many of these cases, fortunately, they don't develop these feelings of negative feelings against society and against the world and against the universe or anything. But certainly there is a segment of the population that they say, okay, we need to survive somehow. I cannot operate like this any longer. And then they start discovering alternative sources of income that are not necessarily within the legal system. And this is, again, I am not trying to condone, I am not trying to say that this is the only reason, but this is certainly a significant contributor to crime, violence, and in general, the deterioration of social norms in many Latin American countries. Obviously, number 4, poverty and inequality can also, well, I'm using this word erode, can diminish both economic and political stability. And this is partially what the new left politicians used to launch their political platforms, and they were successful in convincing enough of the population to vote for them that put them in the presidency. You know, think about this. Roughly speaking, and this is the early 2000s, but things have not changed very much 20 years later. 1/3 of people in Latin America live below the poverty line. And I am going to define what the poverty line is in the next few slides. But essentially, 1/3 of the Latin American people are poor, right? And this is not as bad as extreme poor. And I am going to define this later, but that number is pretty big too. So, let me make a pause here. Any comments, any questions so far? All right. So let me, like I said, I am going to split this conversation or this section in, well, at least 2, maybe a third, because we have 3 lectures on this section. But anyway, the first one is about poverty. So let's start talking about definitions and some important elements so that we can actually talk properly about this. And this is not an economic development class. You know, I normally go further in other classes, but this is important for definitional purposes and conversational purposes. So defining poverty is a very controversial topic, because as you can imagine, being poor in the USA is not the same as being poor in India or in Egypt or in Bolivia. It's a very different thing, right? However, we need to figure out, economic development people. We need to figure out a way to more or less compare poverty levels across countries, compare poverty levels over time, whether they are increasing, decreasing. So we need to figure out some standards. Right now, the accepted definition of poverty is this, is the proportion or the percentage of the population, I'm reading this from the screen, unable to meet basic needs such as food, health, care, education, and shelter, right? Now, this is relatively easy to understand because, we understand what all of these things means, at least in the most basic sense. But still, it's not giving us a yardstick. You cannot do much with this definition in terms of numbers, statistics. So what we did was to create something called the poverty line, which is defined as the minimum income necessary to buy the socially determined essentials for living. And that's basically the 5 elements that I defined before under definition of poverty: food, health, care, education, and shelter, right? The World Bank is probably the leading institution when it comes to definitions of poverty. So they create what they call a dollar benchmark, which basically is around $50 per month, which is roughly speaking between $1 and $2 per day. So the general notion when you read poverty publications in economics, at least, or political economy, is that if you find a resident of the world making less than $2 per day, is considered poor. If it's making less than $1 per day, is considered extremely poor, right? Now, obviously, this is a very controversial issue because, okay, what about if you find a person making $2.15 per day? Well, for statistical purposes, that person is not considered poor. Yet, can you imagine living with $2.50 or $3.50 per day? It's just, at a whole different level, right? At a whole different level. But the reason we do that is because once you establish this poverty line, all you need to do is to, ask people, how much money do you make per day? And then, you do a survey, or at least, you do a census, or at least a survey, which is a, sample of the population. And then you can calculate, or you can basically do a headcount ratio. So everybody that falls below the poverty line is considered poor, and everybody that falls above is not poor. And that's how we can calculate, okay, you have 200 million people in Latin America and 450 million people in Latin America that are not poor. So roughly speaking, a third right now. And like I said, excess poverty or extreme poverty is normally accepted or considered as those making less than $1 per day. Now think about this. The minimum wage, is here in the U.S., is what, $12, $13 right now or so. Well, in California, the federal is way, way less than that. But this is per hour. The minimum income per hour. So here we're talking about $1 per day, right? So I mean, just to give you an idea of the numbers here. All right. This table is, I took this table from one of your readings. I forgot exactly which one, but this is just to show you the state of poverty before the New Left took over. This is the 80s during the debt crisis, the 90s during the Washington Consensus, all the way to 1997, before the first New Left presidents were being elected, in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, in Ecuador, in Bolivia, and other countries that we have already seen. So this is the, let's see if I can highlight this, draw here. So this is I don't know if you can see that purple thing. Let me change this color to red. You see, this is the 200 million people total under the poverty level, around 90 million people in extreme poverty. And then you have the distribution between urban and rural. So notice that proportionally speaking, you have a larger number, a larger percentage of rural poverty, and also a larger percentage of extreme rural poverty. And this is going to come up again once we move to the next section and we start talking about agriculture and the so-called dual structure of agriculture, because you have a very, very, very large number of small farms, and you have a very, very small number of super mega large corporate farms. We're going to talk about that later, but the point is that rural poverty in Latin America percentage-wise is higher, although the number of poor people is higher in the cities. You can see 125 versus 78. And of course, this is important, guys, because if you remember, during the ISI strategy, when the countryside was abandoned in favor of industrializing the country, that's the time where I'm talking about the 60s, the 70s. That's the time where we saw a huge migration from the countryside to the cities. And of course, the cities were unable to absorb this massive amount of workers, typically with no skills. They were farmers. And this is, you know, in many cases, they sold the land. They cannot go back. Not just even if they kept the land, there is no reason for to going back because it's not productive. It's, you know, they have no access to irrigation, to fertilizers. We're going to talk about agriculture later. The point is, urban poverty is in numbers is higher than rural poverty, but percentage-wise is the opposite. All right, let me clear this. All right, now, why is not moving? All right. Poverty numbers are very useful, but again, many economists have cast some doubt as to the validity and the ability to compare over time and across countries. So some economists working at the UN, the United Nations, years ago created something called the HDI, the Human Development Index. They have different kinds of indices, but the most important one that I have seen over time used more widely by researchers and people interested in these issues is the HDI. So let me stop sharing this because I want to show you this very quickly. Share screen. Where's my screen? Right here. Okay, so on the screen, you are supposed to be looking at the Human Development Reports. The Human Development Report is the flagship publication of the UN. So the same way the World Bank has the World Development Report as the flagship publication, the UN has the HD report. And within the Human Development Report, you can find the HDI, the Human Development Index, which is right here. So economists said, you know, if you only look at income as the only dimension to measure poverty, you're missing a lot. Because being poor is not only about the lack of money. No, that's a completely incomplete version of poverty. So after, you know, many rounds of discussions and deliberations and many other things, the HDI was reduced to the following elements. Let me see if I can do this in a much better way now. Okay, I think this is going to work. So the first element right here in a red circle is life expectancy. So they said, you need to understand that it's not only about income, it's also about your expectation as to how long it's going to live how long you're going to live, and also this is going to be supposed to be reflecting the state of health. The second two have to do with education, expected years of schooling and mean years of schooling, and of course, some sort of measurement of income. You know, if you're measuring poverty, some sort of income variable has to be part of this index. And in this website, you can spend hours really going over other pieces of information, how the index is built and all of these things. But right now, really all I want to show you is this. So in the UN report, you typically find 180 plus countries around the world, and they rank all these countries by HDI. Well, guess what? Norway is ranked #1 with a quasi-perfect HDI, which would be equal to 1. The higher the index, the higher it's close to 1, the better in terms of human development. Not just poverty, but human development. But now I can go pages, you know, this is the first page. Now Latin America country shows up. Second page, no one, just Europe, some Asian countries, obviously the US. I am in the third page, fourth page, fifth page. Here is the first country, Chile, 43. So the highest ranked Latin American country in terms of HDI happens to be Chile, and is, well, I would say mid-range, because if you have, well, I don't know, it depends on how you split the sample, but remember, we have 180, so the highest rank is Chile, with an HDI of 0.85. Look at the life expectancy. I don't know if you understand what life expectancy means, but statistically speaking, this is what every Chilean is expected to live, right? Now, obviously, in other countries, this is a bit higher. But if you look at, you know, countries like, say, Nigeria, look at this. The life expectancy at birth is 54. Obviously, Nigeria is one of the poorest countries in the world, and that is not surprising. But you know, I can look at another country in Latin America, say Honduras, 75. And again, you can do your own research. The point is that, well, before I leave this page, you can go to download data, especially for those of you that are doing some econometrics work and you are interested in economic development, guys. You have access to a lot of pretty good information. So, for example, here you can download. Oh, I am downloading stuff now. I didn't mean to do this. But anyway, the point is that you can download all of these countries for all of these years. I don't know if you can see. Let me highlight this very quickly. Since 1990 to 2019. So you have 20 years of data multiplied by 180 countries. So how much is that? 3,600 observations, which is pretty good, you know, for a cross-section study. You know, it's something that's pretty decent. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out because some of you I know are working on some econometrics work in other classes, and this could be useful. Anyway, so, okay, before I leave this page, any questions, any comments? All right. Now let me go back here. Where is my page? Right here. Okay. So anyway, this is the link right here, the link that takes you to the Human Development Index. And this is just some cultural stuff in different places in Latin America. These, you know, in some other parts of the world, we'll call these shanty towns or these remote locations that are really, really poor. So in Brazil, these neighborhoods are called favelas, ranchos in Venezuela, calampas in Chile, and many other names. But in some of these places, believe it or not, they are so different from the rest of the country or the rest of the city that in some cases, not even the police forces go in. They have their own institutionalized security system, their own governance system. It's a very interesting phenomena because they are isolating themselves as a, well, they claim as a protective mechanism. And anyway, I've been to some of them, and some of them are a bit dangerous. Some of them are okay. I mean, I'm not recommending that you go even for research purposes, especially if you don't speak the language, because you really want to know what they are saying about you being there. But anyway, interesting places to be. All right. Again, this is a table I took from one of the readings, and the purpose of showing this in 2001 is for you to see how, well, for example, the HDI right here on the first two columns, the numbers for Latin America were 20 years ago, and then you can look up the HDI today, 20 years later. There have been some progress. Things are getting a bit better in Latin America in terms of poverty, fortunately, but still, Chile, Uruguay, that usually rank at the highest in the list, they are way below the 40, the 45, the 45th country when you compare all across the world. What I really want to highlight is that as useful as the HDI is for comparison and as an improvement over the poverty threshold and the poverty line, certainly the HDI is an improvement because it includes more factors, life expectancy for health, schooling for education, and income, is not complete yet. And obviously, we cannot put everything into an index. I guess we could, we just haven't done it. To include, for example, the following. Here is one element that very few people are familiar with in Latin America. Housing. What are the characteristics of housing? And, things are better now, but roughly speaking, less than half now in 2020, but less than half of the homes in Latin America are not connected to the sewage system. So they are using septic tanks, even in the cities. I'm not talking just about the rural communities. I'm talking about some really bad places within already established cities. And you can see, the different countries have different indicators, but some of them have very limited access to drinkable water. And guess what? At least in 2001, just think about this, or 1999. Let me highlight something that I think you're going to appreciate in terms of the dramatic number. Look at this one. 64% of the houses, only 64% of the homes in Guatemala had electricity. Think about that. Obviously, this number is much higher now. I don't know what the number is, 80, 85%, perhaps. But, here in the Valley, we are discussing, the digital divide. No access to high-speed internet and no access. Well, in many Latin American countries, which is not Africa, we're talking about the relatively developed region in the world, they don't even have electricity, right? So this conversation, this debate about, the whys or why nots of digital divide, they only dream about it. They are asking for access to electricity first so they can run their air conditioning or any other thing, to watch TV, to put the radio on, right? Whole different world. And here is another one. Let me show you this one. Communication indicators. And again, this is from the 2000s. So things have improved now, but not much. So again, just to give you an idea of the dramatic differences. So this is the number of internet hosts per 10,000 people in the US, 2.4 million. host. And you can pick any country, even the more advanced countries like, well, Canada is there. I'm sure they are catching up pretty quickly. But look at places like Honduras, not even one, only 20 years ago, when we had already 2.4 million per 10,000 people, right? And of course, you can do a similar analysis for cellular phones or computers. So the point I'm trying to make here is that Latin American countries, even today, not only have much less limited access to technology in terms of communications, at least, but as I explained before, they are still struggling for basic stuff like electricity. Now, the US here, if you look at the demography, population growth, natural population growth is relatively is almost close to zero. So the US population, that means population being born in the US is zero. The only reason we keep going up in terms of population growth is because migration. So we are receiving people from all over the world. In other countries, for example, Germany, for example, Japan, the population is actually shrinking, despite the fact that they are receiving immigrants. In Latin America, although things are changing right now, Latin America is a very young population. They have not reached that thing that is called the cancellation element, where the number of people being born is the same as the number of people dying. You know, in Latin America, you have a large number of young people, school-age citizens in Latin America. So when you have this massive amount of poverty, massive amount of, well, no access to all of these services, electricity, computers, water, sewage, all of these things, these elements have a very, very negative impact, particularly on children, right? According to some estimates, between 20 and 30% of Latin American children right now are growing up in conditions of overcrowding, 3 or more people per bedroom. And obviously, this is going to impact school performance if they even go to school, right? Just in Brazil, there is a very sad story about the children living on the streets. This number, I'm sure, is higher now, 200,000 children growing up on the streets, really literally on the streets. Well, homeless children. And this is important, guys, because, you know, we normally think of young people, children, as the future. We want to invest in the children. We want to make sure that they have the best access to everything it's possible, because they represent the decision makers of the future, the company owners of the future, the politicians of the future, the fathers and mothers of the future. Well, in Latin America, we have been missing at least 2, perhaps 3 generations already of these children. And many of them grow up in conditions that where literally they don't know better. Mom and dad were criminals. That's what they know. That's what they do. And then that perpetuates. There is the second generation of people in narco traffic, the second generation of people in organ trafficking, the second, and you get the idea, right? You get the idea. Here is another problem that has to do with communication. This is let me take one step back, but people like Machiavelli and, you know, Antonio Gramsci and other really interesting political figures in history, you know, you can encounter some arguments that go like this. For a tyrant, for a person in power, it's better to have an ignorant population than an educated one, because an educated one can rebel, fight, and defeat whoever is in power, right? So this is a very cynical way to introduce this idea. In Latin America, where literacy is not universal, meaning many children don't know how to read. They don't know how to write. The ability to communicate or miscommunicate through the media is very powerful. TV specifically can be used as a tool for social and political means. They don't know how to read, but they understand words. So you can put a lot of people in front of the TV or on the radio delivering messages that have no, the people listening to this messaging have no point of reference because they don't read the newspaper, they don't read books, they don't go to school, they don't do much. So many of these messages on TV and radio are taken as truth. That's it. That's it. No criteria, no critical thinking, no judgment. Just take it and move on, which is very dangerous if you think about that. Anyway, let me close this with this section, and you can read this later on. But this is a section that I want to highlight because I remember it's one of the questions, at least in one of the midterms. Who are the poor in Latin America? Most of the poverty is concentrated in a few countries: Brazil, Mexico, and Peru. Although things are now getting worse in Venezuela, Haiti, Dominican Republic, and Nicaragua. But anyway, in terms of size, these countries dominate. Rural poverty is twice as high as urban poverty as a whole. So we are going to cover this later. Women have a much larger chance of being poor, mainly because they are segregated to low-income jobs. And well, if we think that in the US we have a severe case of gender discrimination, well, in Latin America is more severe, is worse. So women make on average between 14 and 53 cents per dollar less than men. And another group that is considered poor in Latin America is indigenous populations. Poverty tends to be significantly higher among those groups belonging to indigenous groups, Mayas, Zapotecas, and many others. There are like 300 different groups in Latin America. So anyway, I'm going to stop here. I don't want to cut anybody's time. But anyway, questions, comments before we leave. I know I kind of covered a lot and I talk a lot. This time, for some reason, you were quiet, which is fine. You don't have to make comments every time. But so any questions, any comments? All right. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to stop recording now.